Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So I'm breaking down the two-game Saturday slate for this weekend over on Draftkings, and actually two solid games here. We got some fun players to watch, so I'm looking forward to it. And plus, it's football on a Saturday, so what more do you really want here? But if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. And while you're at it, you might as well hit that notification bell as well, so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And YouTube tells us that around 50% of the people watching these videos have not yet subscribed. So if you're a frequent visitor of the channel, or if you're just new and you like what you see, consider that subscribe button because it really helps the channel grow, and that's obviously going to help me out as well. We're going to follow the socials in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. If you're going to help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that if you want access into the entire NFL DFS data sheet, cheat sheet, projections, notes, and my Discord chat, all that fun stuff. Link is down below. But without further ado, I think that's enough plugging. Let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. Now, the plan for this video is just to talk about a handful of players I like at each spot, because I don't want to be here for an hour or two breaking down each and every single player on the slate. But as for the quarterback position, I want to talk about all four just because there's only four of these guys, so that shouldn't take too long. And we can stem plays from the quarterbacks that we like, so I figured we could just break them all down. But starting up top, we have Aaron Rodgers just shy of $8,000 coming in at $7,800. Very expensive, but he's having an absolutely fantastic season, so I do think it's deserved. And he's been right up there with Patrick Mahomes for being the MVP of the season. Both those guys have been absolutely phenomenal, but Patrick Mahomes certainly left the door open last week after throwing 3 interceptions versus the Miami Dolphins, and Rodgers just had an absolutely fantastic game versus the Detroit Lions. So very excited to see how that race ends up. I think it's going to come down to how they perform the past couple of weeks of the season because it's just such a tight race. But Rodgers here gets a great spot here versus Carolina. They have not been that great defensively this season. They're ranked 27th DVOA versus the pass and also 21st versus quarterbacks when it comes to fantasy points given up per game to the position. And like I've been saying earlier, Rodgers has been absolutely flawless this season, just shy of 300 yards per game, 3 passing touchdowns, not really turning the ball over much, and about 8.2 yards per attempt. And he's got one of the best wide receivers in football to throw the ball to in Davante Adams. They usually hook up once, twice, or even 3 times every single week. And they also have the highest implied team total in the slate at 30 points. And this game features a 51.5 point over-under compared to the Buffalo game being at only 49 points, about 3 points lower. And I guess maybe the only concern here is that they are 8.5 point favorites, but that's not anything too drastic where they're like 15, 16 point favorite, 20 point favorites versus the Jets. So I think this game should stay competitive for the most part, and the Packers defense isn't all that great. And Carolina's got some capable players on offense to keep this game somewhat competitive. I mean, Teddy Bridgewater's not the worst quarterback in the world. Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore are 2 pretty good wide receivers. Unfortunately, no Christian McCaffrey. If Christian McCaffrey was playing, this would be a loaded game because you'd have Rodgers, Jones, Adams, McCaffrey, the 2 wide receivers I already talked about. But Mike Davis isn't that bad. He's not nearly Christian McCaffrey, but he's been capable. He's shown he's capable of putting up some pretty strong games like he did last week versus the Denver Broncos. And that Green Bay Packers run defense is nothing to be scared of whatsoever. So I think this game could stay competitive, and if it does, definitely think it could be a very high-scoring game. You're definitely going to want pieces from it. But I do view Rodgers as more of a tournament option compared to Josh Allen just because he's $600 more. And Josh Allen has shown plenty of ability to have some very elite games this season. He's shown he can have a high floor and a very high ceiling as well. He's had multiple games over 30 fantasy points this season. And the Bills aren't too far behind the Green Bay Packers implied team total, 2.5 points lower at 27.5. Over-under is also at 49 points, which is not that much lower as well. And we have a slightly tighter spread here at 6 points. Don't really think Denver's going to have an absolutely fantastic game versus Buffalo, but I mean, that Denver defense is not what it was earlier in the season. They're missing so many pieces in the secondary. So I know on the season, Denver is still 13th DVOA versus the pass, and they're mid-pack versus quarterbacks, but they're missing about 3 corners. AJ Boye, Bryce Callahan, Bassey, I believe that's what his name is, and another guy. But they're all going to be out, so it just makes throwing on them even a little bit easier. They've also haven't been that great versus the run this year either. But yeah, I'm definitely in on Josh Allen. I think he's a little bit too cheap. I think he should be very close to Aaron Rodgers in the price tag category, and he's not. And on the season, I mean, 280 passing yards per game, which is just below Aaron Rodgers, as he's only 3 yards less. He's thrown the ball a little bit more. He can also run the ball. That's something Aaron Rodgers doesn't typically do. I mean, Rodgers isn't the slowest quarterback in the world, but Josh Allen's averaging close to 30 yards rushing per game and about half a rushing touchdown, which always gives him a nice floor. I already talked about the matchup, but Josh Allen, I think, is a fantastic play. I would say he's my QB1 in the slate, then Aaron Rodgers is my QB2 when you factor in the price tag, and also his option to stack with and Stephon Diggs is much cheaper than Davante Adams. So yeah, Josh Allen, I think he's an absolutely fantastic play in the slate, and I think he's your cash game quarterback as well. And then after that, we get the two cheap quarterbacks. So we have Teddy Bridgewater at 5,200 going up against Green Bay. Then we have Drew Lock at $5,000 going up against Buffalo. So if we look at the matchups for both of these guys, Green Bay this season, they're only allowing the 5th fewest points per game to the quarterback position, despite being 20th DVA versus the pass. And the Bills, they're 26th versus quarterbacks, allowing 22.3 points per game, but they're 16th DVA versus the pass. So even though the matchup on paper is a bit better here for Drew Lock, I still feel like Teddy Bridgewater is the more exciting play here because he's only $200 more, and he's got Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore to get the ball to. Plus, that game features a slightly higher over/under, so there's potential for more points being scored in that one. So I would lean Teddy Bridgewater over Drew Lock if you have to use a value quarterback. I'm going to try my very best to be able to fit in Josh Allen, but if I can't fit in Devontae Adams with a spent-up quarterback, it might end up being worth it just dropping down to Teddy Bridgewater so you can lock in those 30, 35 points you're going to get from Devontae Adams, because I feel like if Allen doesn't just go absolutely off for Rodgers where they get 40-some points, if Teddy Bridgewater gets you around 20, it might be worth the drop-off to be able to fit in a guy like Devontae Adams. If you can fit in Adams with using Allen, Rodgers, and getting two of the better running backs on the slate, I still think that's fine. But if you have to drop down to the bottom tier, I do think Teddy Bridgewater is a slight lean for me over Drew Lock. And with that being said, I think we move on to the running back position. There's really not much to talk about when it comes to the running backs. It's kind of Aaron Jones, Mike Davis, and everybody else. So we're up top with Aaron Jones at $7,300. He's in a pretty good matchup here versus Carolina, and Mike Davis is in a great spot versus Green Bay as well. This is in the same game, but he is an 8.5 point favorite at home with an implied team total of nearly 30 points. So there should be plenty of scoring opportunities here for Aaron Jones. The only knock I ever have with Jones is that he's not going to get that lead volume that guys like Derrick Henry or Dalvin Cook are going to get. He's a very talented running back. He's also involved in the passing game, but the amount of volume he's going to get is never as much as you'd want it to be. Jamal Williams is always going to steal carries, which always sucks, and it's infuriating owning Aaron Jones a lot of weeks because you're like, why is Jamal Williams on the field over Aaron Jones? Trust me, I wish I knew. And he did bust last week in a fantastic matchup versus Detroit, had less than 10 points, still had 15 carries, but again, just wasn't really enough. But he should get around 15 to 20 carries here versus Carolina. If you're looking at their numbers this season, they're 19th DVA versus the run, and they're 26th versus running backs, allowing over 25 Draftkings points per game. Also, 6 catches per game and 40 receiving yards. And Aaron Jones is a capable pass catcher. On the season, he's just below a 15% target share, about 4.5 targets per game. He's efficient with his touches, over 5 yards per carry. It's just like I said, the volume's never going to be exactly where you want it. If you can fit in Jones and Mike Davis, I think that's the best way to go about it at the running back position. But if fitting in Aaron Jones doesn't get you to Devontae Adams, like if you can't afford Adams, I would not have an issue dropping down from Jones to get Adams in, just because he's definitely way more consistent. I'd say the ceiling is higher as well. My plan would be to get both Jones and Adams in, but I'm just saying if you had to pick between the two, it's definitely going to be Adams over Jones, but I do know there's a massive price difference there. And then dropping down to Mike Davis, $6,500. I think he's the overall best running back to use on this slate. He had a great game last week versus Denver. The usage was up, and he was involved in the passing game, which is nice to see, because I know earlier on in the season when Christian McCaffrey was out, Mike Davis just stopped getting involved in the passing game, which was kind of weird because it was really working early on the season, but got back on track last week, had a pretty strong game. I believe he had 2 touchdowns in that one as well. And this is a great matchup on the ground versus Green Bay. On the season, they're ranked 28th versus running backs, which means they're allowing the 5th most points per game, 30 DraftKings points, and their 22nd DVA versus the pass, versus the run. I'm sorry, not versus the pass, and close to 6 catches per game, and nearly a half a receiving touchdown per game to the running back position. So I do like Mike Davis. I know they are 8.5 point dogs on the road here, but I think that's still fine because Mike Davis is still going to be involved through the air. So either way, I think he's a good play. And at $6,500 with no Christian McCaffrey, I would say he's the overall best running back play on the slate. That's probably going to reflect on ownership as well. And if you have to use a cheap running back, I think either of these guys are fine in the flex spot or even as your RB2 if you want to spend up for wide receiver to get both Diggs and Adams in, because both of the guys are absolutely tremendous plays. But Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, these guys are pretty much going to split snaps. Zach Moss is going to get more of his work on the ground, and while Singletary isn't a huge factor in the passing game, he's still the pass catching running back in this offense, even though it's nothing huge. He's not an Alvin Kamara kind of guy or anything, but both these guys are going to be involved. But since they're 6-point favorites here, if they're playing with the lead for the majority of this game, I could see Zach Moss being the better play over Devin Singletary if they happen to be trailing. I would say Singletary would be the better play over Zach Moss. Now, since he's $400 cheaper, I would say Singletary is probably going to grade out as a better point per dollar option play for most people, which I can definitely agree with. But just from a game script perspective, if they are 6-point favorites, but they are 6-point favorites, which means they should be playing for a lead in this game. I could definitely see Zach Moss being the better play, especially if he ends up having to get into the end zone. And on the season, the Broncos are 25th DVOA versus the run, and they're ranked 21st versus running back. So both these guys are playable. Singletary has more pass catching upside, which is always fun on a PPR site like DraftKings. But Zach Moss, he should get some more work on the ground, although it's a very even split for these guys, and I would not be surprised if they score around these same points. And with that being said, I think we can move on to the wide receiver position. Both the Broncos running backs are viable, but again, I don't want to talk about the entire slate here. I'm just not really that interested in either of those guys, and they're both not really involved in the passing game either, and they're 6-point dogs as well. So anyway, moving on to the wide receiver position. And we are loaded up top here. We have two of the best wide receivers in football this season, in Devontae Adams and Stephon Diggs. Now, Adams is a lot more expensive than Stephon Diggs, but I mean, I don't think anyone should be surprised with Adams' price tag. He goes off pretty much each and every single week. I think he had just shy of 30 points last week. I want to say he was around 27 or 28 points, which is crazy because that sounds like a disappointing game for Devontae Adams. Because if I told you before the slate that Adams is getting around 27, 28 points, you're probably like, okay. But if a lot of wide receivers did that, you're pretty happy. That's just the new normal for Devontae Adams is like around 30, 35 DraftKings points, so it's always a little bit disappointing when he gets below that, but on the season, he's just absolutely crushing. I don't think I have to tell you guys that he's a good play, but if you want to read the numbers, I mean, they're just absolutely insane. A 33% target share in the season, about a 40% market share of the team's air yards, a 76% weighted opportunity share. He scores a touchdown pretty much each and every single week. I think in all the games that he's played healthy this year, the only game he didn't score in was week 6 versus Tampa Bay, where the Packers only scored 10 offensive points. Outside of that, because he did get hurt week 2 versus Detroit, he's in the end zone each and every single week. And this is a good matchup versus the Panthers. They're 27th DVOA versus the pass. They're kind of more so mid-pack versus wide receivers. But does anyone really care about matchups when it comes to Devontae Adams? I know I certainly do. He's going to get you those 10-plus targets, over 100 receiving yards. And if he gets into the end zone once or twice, you're definitely going to want him in your lineups on this slate, especially on a 2-game slate. Like, if you're going to fade Devontae Adams on a 2-game slate, I would be very nervous. I know there's probably a 0% chance I wouldn't have him on my main lineup. I know it's very expensive, and you're definitely going to want Stephon Diggs as well. But I think on this slate, you're going to want to prioritize getting in Adams and Diggs, and then you kind of try to build around those guys, because I just feel like there's such tremendous plays on this slate. You could throw in Mike Davis as the big 3 for me. I guess like Adams, Diggs, Mike Davis. I feel like those are the guys to build around for the most part. And you kind of land on whatever quarterback you land on, preferably Josh Allen if you can make that work. I know it's a lot of money, but I think we have enough value here to make that work here. But yeah, Adams, awesome play. I'd try to find a way to fit him in. Then right below me, I have Stephon Diggs, who's much cheaper. What about $1,500 cheaper at $7,900? I would say, I'd say he's my top wide receiver once you factor in the price point. Like, yeah, I have Adams projected higher than Stephon Diggs, but again, he's nearly $10,000 at this point. Diggs is below 8K. He's coming off a great game versus Pittsburgh, one of the best defenses in football. Hit over 30 points in that game, 10 catches, 130 yards, and found the end zone. Would not be surprised if he has a similar performance here versus Denver. Now, on the season versus wide receivers, they're going to look a bit stingy here, because again, they had a pretty good secondary at some point. They're 13th DVOA versus the pass, and they're allowing the 10th fewest points per game at the wide receiver position. But you gotta keep in mind, they're without their 3 starting corners: Bryce Callahan, AJ Boye. He's suspended. Callahan's on IR, and Bassey's out as well. So it's a pretty soft matchup here. We're going up against backups for the most part, so Diggs should be able to eat in this game. He's got a 30% target share in the season, about 10 targets per game, 8 catches, close to 100 receiving yards. If you're playing Josh Allen, you 100% want to pair him up with Stephon Diggs. And even if you're not playing Josh Allen, I still want Diggs in my lineup, because he's kind of like the wide receiver 1 in the slate once you factor in the price tag. Like, Adams, obviously number 1, but Stephon Diggs right behind him in projections, and he's also much cheaper. Then outside of the 2 top dogs here, it kind of gets just a bit of a mixed bag, as guys you can just kind of throw in at your wide receiver 3 or flex spot. So DJ Moore, $5,200. You can certainly pay Robbie Anderson as well, but he's $1,000 more expensive. And on the season, their numbers are very similar, so I might not play the cheaper guy here. And I think Moore's just a little bit too cheap at $5,200. I know he's coming off the COVID list, and that can affect players differently, but he got activated, so we know he's going to be good to go. On the season, slate less than 80 receiving yards per game, a little bit over 7 targets, just under a 23% target share, but a 40% market share of the team's air yards, which is one of the highest in the entire league, 8 out of 12.6. Now, the matchup versus the Packers, I don't love it. They are 20th DVOA versus the pass, but they're allowing the 6th fewest points per game to the wide receiver position, and they should see a decent amount of Alexander in this game, who we know is a pretty darn good corner, so I don't think it's going to be I don't think it's like an absolute smash spot here for DJ Moore, but it's mainly just a price play on a 2-game slate. And if you're going to stack the Packers, it makes sense to run it back with someone outside of Mike Davis. So I think DJ Moore is a fine option there given the price point. Then dropping out of Cole Beasley at $4,700, I do think is a solid play without John Brown in. And he's just another cheap pairing with Josh Allen. He's shown he's had ability to have some big games this year. Just in Week 13 versus San Francisco, he had 31 points in that game. All the way back in Week 10 versus Arizona, he had over 30 points in that game as well. Then versus the Jets in Week 7, he had over 25 points again. And for the most part, he's been a guy you can kind of rely on this year. On the season, just below 7 targets per game at about a 20% target share. You got to keep in mind, though, a lot of those games did have John Brown in there, so a bit of a mixed stats there, and you can bump those numbers up when John Brown happens to be out. So I think Cole Beasley's a pretty good play and a good matchup versus Denver. Like I just talked about with Stephon Diggs, the matchup on paper, if you're just looking at the season statistics, Denver has had a good defense versus wide receivers, but they're missing all their corners, so overall it's a pretty soft matchup, and it was one of the big reasons I liked the Panthers wide receivers last week. Even though they didn't go absolutely off, they still had Robbie Anderson was, I want to say, 18 points, and then Curtis Samuel was close to 17, which was fine given their price points. And then some cheap wide receivers. We have Tim Patrick and Gabriel Davis. Since I just talked about another Buffalo wide receiver, we'll just group in Gabriel Davis there. Since John Brown's out, he's going to be in a full-time role. He's going to play the majority of the snaps. He's $4,000, and he has scored in the past, 4 games that he's played. I'm not sure if we can expect those trends to continue, but I would not be surprised here in a soft matchup versus Denver. They also have the higher applied team total compared to the Broncos wide receiver in Tim Patrick, so there should be more scoring opportunities for a guy like Gabriel Davis. We could look at the per-game numbers on the season, but again, it's a bit skewed because in games when John Brown plays, Gabriel Davis isn't really that involved. But in a full-time role, he should see a nice handful of targets, and I do think he's a pretty solid play here at only $4,000. Then Tim Patrick at $4,300. So I like the price tag. I think he's a talented wide receiver. I think he's a bit underrated. And the Buffalo defense versus wide receivers this season, they're kind of mid-pack and 16th EVA versus the pass, and they should see a decent amount of Tre'Davious White in this game. But I expect the Broncos to be throwing the ball quite a bit here. They are 6-point dogs at home. And if that's the case, I think at $4,300, he should get anywhere from, 5 to 10 targets. And if he happens to find the end zone at $4,300, that would make him a pretty decent play. And he's actually averaging half a receiving touchdown per game this season, which is only below Devontae Adams on this list. Not about the entire NFL, but just below Devontae Adams on this list. Also has an 8 out of 13.4, so it's not like he's just a pure possession wide receiver. He's got a bit of big play upside as well. So Tim Patrick, I think he's a solid play there, but it's nothing too exciting. He's just a nice salary relief option. I think that's it for the wide receivers, so let's move on to the tight end position. And it's not really that great of a position here. We have 2 decent options in Robert Tonyan and Noah Fant. Then we have 2 dumpster bin options in Dawson Knox and Ian Thomas. Although the way this slate is, I don't think going with a bottom tier tight end is the worst way to go about it, because if that's what allows you to fit in Adams, Diggs, Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones, Mike Davis on this slate, I say go for it, because I don't feel like the difference from them between guys like Tonyan or Fant are going to be that drastic to where you're going to absolutely want one of those top 2 tight ends. Unless one of them, like Fant, happens to get 2 touchdowns and 100 yards, then yeah, for sure, you're going to want Noah Fant in because he's going to be in the winning lineup, but that's really not been the case this season. But up top, you have Tonyan, $4,500. There's always touchdown upside when you have Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback. Now this season, Tonyan's been scoring a lot of touchdowns, about 0.7 touchdowns per game. Yeah, 0.7 touchdowns per game. He's actually scored in his past 4 games as well. Now, he's never really going to have a big yardage game, about 41 receiving yards per game. So if he doesn't get into the end zone, you're probably not too happy with the production that he gives you, especially at nearly $5,000. So I would definitely say he's not the best point per dollar option play at the tight end position on this slate. I would say Noah Fant's got him beat in that regard. But it's a good matchup versus the Panthers. They are 25th versus tight ends. So I think he's a fine play if you have the money for him, but definitely not a must for me. Noah Fant, like I said earlier, he's probably the better point per dollar option play over Robert Tonyan. I know he left the game early on last week. I guess he had food poisoning, but he's been practicing fully this week, so I'm assuming that's behind him. And he's an athletic tight end. He certainly has big play upside as well. I know on the season he's averaging only 41 receiving yards per game, which is similar to Tonyan, and about 5 targets per game. But he's left a couple of times early on, so he didn't get a full game in, so those numbers can be a bit skewed there. But I would say I'd want to play Noah Fant over Robert Tonyan just because of the price savings, and I feel like their upside is similar, and Noah Fant has some pretty big upside as well. And the Buffalo Bills are not that good versus tight ends. They're actually allowing the 4th most points per game position, over half a receiving touchdown per game, and close to 70 receiving yards. So Noah Fant, definitely think he's a good option here. And if we have to go dumpster diving, we have Dawson Knox and Ian Thomas. Knox, he's only $2,800, and he actually had 7 targets last week, which is a season high. So even if he just gets like 4 to 5 targets in this game, that's not bad given the price point. Now the Broncos haven't been awful versus tight ends this season. They're top half in the league, allowing the 12th fewest points per game to the position. But I gotta keep in mind they are missing quite a few players in their defense, which is definitely going to soften it up. And he's mainly just a price play here. Same with Ian Thomas. He's coming off of a 4-target game, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually the 2nd most targets he saw in a game this season. I think all the way back in week 4 he had 5. But if he can get you like 3 to 5 targets in this game. He's only $2,500, and they are 8.5-point dogs here, and he's on the field, so that's really all you can ask for a guy that's pretty much the min price at $2,500. If he gets into the end zone, you'll be very happy. If not, I mean, 3 to 5 points isn't the worst thing in the world at his price point, and if he fits you in a guy like Adams, it's kind of whatever. Who cares? I'm just hoping he gets a catch. I'm not expecting much, but again, he is cheap. And the Packers are 23 versus the pass, but they are kind of tough versus tight ends, allowing the 6th fewest points per game to the position. But either way, it's mainly just a price play. And as for the defenses, the two preferred options here are obviously the favorites and the Packers and the Bills. I would say the Bills are the best defense to use just because they're $500 cheaper than the Packers. And the Packers defense isn't that great. Now the Bills defense isn't great either, but 21.5 implied team total against them, which is the exact same as the Packers. And I'm less scared of the Broncos offense than I am of the Carolina Panthers. Plus, I'd plan on having more Panthers in my lineup than Broncos, so it just makes sense correlation-wise. So Packers, Bills, the preferred options, and then if you have to go cheap, Broncos, Panthers, I would say I prefer the Broncos defense over the Bills just because I don't want to pick on Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, and Aaron Jones. I don't want to pick on Josh Allen either, but again, if you had to pick, I would say I'd go with the Broncos there. But that's going to be it for this video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. If you want to follow me on social media, Pennell16 on Twitter, cpenn16 over on IG. If you want to support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that. And I think that's going to be it. So I'll stop talking now, and I'll see you guys in the next video.